We are now recording.
Cool. Let's wait actually one more. Well, we can get started, whatever. Abhishek's here. I'm gonna paste the meeting notes in the chat. And welcome anyone that's new. This is our working group talking about how we secure critical projects. Today we have two people that are going to chat with us. I think the first step in securing critical projects is defining what projects are critical. So we're going to talk about that today. Abhishek is going to kick it off. We can talk about the Criticality Score project and talk about some of the feedback on it, and then we can have a discussion around that. And then Jenny from Harvard's Innovation Lab is going to follow up with discussion about, how we can do more here in getting that criticality list. And then if there are any other quick topics, if we have time, feel free to add something quickly to the agenda, or we can table it for next meeting. So cool. Abhishek, do you want to take it away or introduce yourself?
Both. Yes. Hello, folks. I'm Abhishek. I lead the fuzzing efforts in Google and recently started contributing to various OSS security efforts and collaborate very closely with Kim and Dan here. So let's start. Let me present my screen. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah.
Cool. So as Kim said, why do we really want a criticality score? So let me go over the problem first. So you might not know this, but we have at least on GitHub itself, around 200 million repositories. And if we decide to make it a purpose to improve the security of them all, that's not feasible. And most of these projects are not even relevant for the open source community. They can be these fun toy projects or just forks that nobody uses. So the problems boils down to we have to find the really critical ones that are important for the security of the internet, that critical infrastructure depend on. But the problem is, how do we find it? And right now there isn't a way. You can think of interesting projects like OpenSSL, Kubernetes, but what goes beyond that? So we want to answer that question. And one of the things that comes to mind is, hey, why not just look at the GitHub stars? That's also there in, let's say, GitLab. But it's not really a quantifiable metric. And the reason being, it's kind of similar to this Facebook like button, any user can click it. And it might be not the case that most users depend on this. So to give you an example, this is a repository talking about the harms of working 9 to 9, 6 days a week in China. And this repository has 250K stars. So it's not really relevant for the user security. So criticality score is kind of the first step, first starting step to achieve this goal. So how did we start? We started with a very simple algorithm. It's like a weighted sum of a set of parameters. And we use log scale here because it really helps to shrink down the outliers. So to give you an example, if you have, let's say, a repository with 500 contributors, is it less important than a repository with 5,000 contributors? Maybe, maybe not. So log scale helps to shrink down those outliers. And at a very high level, it uses these three parameters. SI, which is the parameter value itself. Alpha I, which is the weight for that parameter. And as I was saying, we want to shrink down the outliers. So we can have a max threshold. So beyond that, this always results in more like a one value for that parameter. So overall, criticality score comes down as a number between 0 and 1, with 1 being the most critical. And this is based on some previous work by Rob Pike at Google. And I have been collaborating with the Google OSS team as well on deciding some of these factors. So at a high level, we started with a list of parameters. So to give you an example, like we have one of the parameters as when the project was last created. So to think about it, let's say a project created 5 years ago feels more important than a project, let's say, created yesterday. There can be always exceptions to these rules, but what we are trying to do here is we are picking a set of parameters. So it tries to normalize even the outliers or those exceptions. The other set of parameters we use here include things like organization count, which means like how many organizations are contributing to the project or depending on it. Uh, Things like when was this project last updated, and so on. The second set of parameters are also try to get user activity on the project. So things like, let's say, users are filing a lot of issues in there or commenting on the issue, the project might be more important. And one of the last factors, which is very important to discuss here, is this thing called dependency count. So we started with a pretty hacky version of this, which is how do we know the dependencies of a project in a language agnostic manner? And this is a pretty hard problem because you can get this information for languages that have package managers, but not really for, let's say, C++, where most of the security vulnerabilities are. So what we try to do here is we try to look on GitHub itself, like how many commits mention that repository in some way. And the reasoning behind it is when people try to roll to new version, they try to specify we have a question here? No. Okay. Yes, so so that's the dependency count parameter, and we have plans to improve it. So we got quite a bit of community feedback after the launch last month, both positive and negative. And I think this was kind of expected because, as you know, any ranking algorithm can be pretty subjective, but we have to start somewhere. And this is very well said by the first feedback from, let's say, Marcel here, which is if, let's say, you have X million dollars, you have to start somewhere, and you want to then fund those projects. And so let's all work together towards that goal. Some of the negative feedback we got around was people wanted to see how we are differentiating between critical projects and critical dependencies. So for example, there can be projects like, let's say, Bash, which had like little to no activity in the last few years and are just maintained by one developer. So should we be funding those instead of these other popular projects? So these are interesting discussions to do. We got quite a bit of bugs filed in the repo as well, which we started fixing. So to give you an example of these is there was easily and confusion about like when a repository was created. So as you know, many of the repositories got ported over to GitHub. So the real value is actually looking at the commits itself. So the first commit was the right value. So we fixed those bugs. Another large set of bugs we got was around how we did the sampling from the initial set. So as you know, we cannot really calculate criticality score on, let's say, 1 million repos. It's quite unfeasible because of the GitHub API and the GitHub Search API limitations. So what we did here was we started with a smaller set based on stars, like by descending order of stars, and then picked like the top 200 repos. And this didn't cover quite a lot of the important repos. So we have now expanded the sample set to 5,000 and are planning to increase it more. But this initially kind of fixed most of the bugs reported. The other set of bugs we got was around supporting at least the GitLab repo. So we added support for that. However, there are currently problems with the GitLab APIs as well. Like they are not as powerful as the GitHub ones. To give you an example, on GitLab, there is no way to know like the top projects or top popular projects on GitLab by stars, and we have filed a bug on this issue. Also, GitLab provides or allows hosting on your own custom domains. So this makes it pretty infeasible to query because you need different access tokens per non-GitLab repo, per non-GitLab.com repo. The next set of bugs were pretty simple to fix. We were just missing to specify some languages. So for example, TypeScript and CoffeeScript are kind of variants of JavaScript, so they are now included in the list. And there is a last set of bugs which we couldn't fix, and we kind of know about this issue, which is we cannot use any parameters that are not applicable universally or their data is not available universally. So to give you an example, like download count for a particular project are not available for most cases, even with the API. So the final next steps. One of the big things we want to fix is adding better dependency information inside the criticality score. And as I said, this is currently not available for C++. So we are thinking of, or we are looking for your feedback on how we can solve this. The next question comes down to where should our funding be? Where should our funding go? Should it be restricted to critical projects, or should we be focusing on these esoteric dependencies that like everyone depends on and maybe just maintained by one developer? So to give you an example, libjpeg turbo is another one that comes to mind. It's a pretty popular project maintained by one developer for at least the last 10 years. And the final question comes about how can we plug in the real world infrastructure usage data? And this is a pretty hard problem because most companies are not comfortable sharing their usage of third party. So there is some work being planned here. Like I know at least folks at Harvard are trying to collect this usage data anonymously. If that works out, that can very well plug into the criticality score and make it really powerful. And we are also looking for more ideas on this. So that's about it. Any questions?
None here, thanks.
Chris, did you link something though of interest in the chat?
I did. So there's prior work. So a colleague of mine, Nuthan Manaya, was co-author on one of these papers. I don't honestly know the details of the work they did, but they were doing similar work to identify projects of interest in GitHub, right? So if you're doing bulk analytics of software repositories, you want to select out all the noise, right? And so there's this tool called Reaper that they developed to do that. I linked a presentation to it. I have a pre-draft copy of the paper. I think if you go to PeerJ, if you just Google, or DuckDuckGo I used, if you search for that, you can find the copy of the paper. And I believe that they have similar metrics to the ones that you talked about in there. And they were developing a similar system for pulling out important projects, or at least I believe they called them engineered projects, right? So you want to pull out the awesome lists and the little personal pet projects and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But there might be similar kinds of work or at least features that you could use out of that.
Definitely, we'll check it out. Is the source code available as well, or anything?
Yeah, source code's on GitHub.
Okay, cool.
Nice. Yeah, maybe they would want to come and present if it makes sense. But yeah, thank you for sharing.
I can definitely put you in touch with Newton. I mean, we work together.
Yeah. Okay.
Great, thank you.
And then actually, there was one, I think I had maybe part of a question, but I don't remember without the prompt. Like on your slide, you had, on your conclusion slide, I think you had 3 points, and I think it was the middle point. I had something vaguely in my head.
Yes, this the.
Oh, right. The thought I had here was just, I don't know that this is the question I'd ask, or like whether you support critical projects or critical dependencies. I'd frame it more from the standpoint of what does each project need. So the metrics might indicate that there is a need for stronger unit testing, for example, right? And so maybe you want to tailor the types of support you give based on what the metrics are telling you. So basically, what I'm suggesting is that you have to identify what kind of support is needed on a per project basis. Right, like throwing money blindly at the problem is probably not going to achieve your goal, right? And so I think you need to be more need to be clear about what goals it is that we're trying to do to improve security, right? And security is a large, multifaceted thing. So it might look like testing, it might look like code reviews. I don't know what it looks like. Maybe it helps with management structures and teaching people how to, or working backlogs of bugs. There's a lot of different things that could be wrong from a software standpoint. Or maybe, looks like adoption of static analysis. Sorry, I'll stop now.
No. I was just saying, we had like the exact thing in mind, which is to start with at least some facet of security, and fuzzing was the one we started with. So we operate this service called OSS Fuzz, which currently fuzzes like top 400 critical projects, I would say, or some good critical projects like even OpenSSL, Kubernetes and stuff. And we want to really increase the scope of that. And we couldn't come up with this list by just thinking about the projects anymore. So that's where this criticality score work can help. And as you were saying, we need to have those metrics. Like CodeQL comes to mind, like all those repos should have at least CodeQL checks running there, or better unit testing. So please give us ideas on what could be those set of checks and what should be the priority of things.
Yeah, I don't have good evidence for what should be the priority. I think we could look to BSIM or other things like that for at least supersets of things to cherry pick from, right? And use our professional judgment. I don't think there's a lot of evidence that says static analysis warnings are, yield 86% better findings than manual code review or some other kind of thing like that. But I think that, we could get close with a manual list, basically.
Yes, we have another question from Derek. Derek, you want to ask it, or I can just read it for you?
Sure. My immediate concern is that the way this algorithm works, it may weight older projects that are likely to be replaced by newer, for lack of a better word, better technology down the road. There's definitely some disruptive things in the pipes now where, projects like OpenSSL, OpenVPN are still industry standards, but they are rapidly being replaced by alternatives.
Yes, so I would say that created since parameter was just one of the things that contribute to the weight. So if there are other parameters that, let's say, user activity is much more, those are also counted in the weight. So that was the point of the scoring metrics, which is not just have one metric indicate the importance, have like a set of metrics, and like using that bunch normalizes the overall aggregate result to a better value. And it's very easy to play with it on GitHub. Like, we want your feedback to add more parameters that can indicate those things.
Okay, thank you.
We have another question from Laurie. You want to ask that?
Yes. Hi, I'm maintainer of Weekend, open source Kanban, and it's translated to about 60 languages. There are requests now and then for new languages, and it's used in most countries of the world. The Snap version is about at 8,000 servers worldwide, and I don't know stats for other platforms, but there are very many platforms, and Vegan also has a lot of dependencies for different kind of Kanban features, and it's quite full-featured, and there are contributors adding pull requests daily, and I do also release Vegan version about once a day, and there's new features and fixes. So it's mainly me doing that maintaining work, and then there's all the contributors around the world, and of those dependencies, it would be very nice to check those, and are those all up to date and maintained correctly.
Yes, sorry, I didn't get the question correctly. Like, it looks like Vegan is definitely a very popular project, but what was your question again? Like,
yes, about in this checking for security vulnerabilities and getting it more up to date and so on with this security project.
does anyone else understand the question correctly? Sorry, I'm not getting your question right.
But my sense is the question is he's looking for tooling to help him identify the security of his dependencies.
Okay, that part, yeah, there is work to do those things too, like identify vulnerabilities in like dependencies and stuff. Like, maybe Dan, you want to talk about it? Or?
Dependency check is a tool you can use.
Yeah, so there's one thing that's related to like this working group and the stuff OpenSSF is doing that was an interesting use case that I saw. The Envoy project, which is a large project, they started using our scorecards project, which is part of OpenSSF now, and the scorecard is doing a bunch of security checks, and each check either gets a pass-fail value. And so what the Envoy project has done is created a new dependency policy for their project in general, and they're using the scorecards as part of it. So if anyone tries to introduce a new dependency, I'm not exactly sure what they're doing, but probably flagging it in some way to take like a further look at what that project is. And then the flip side of that is it's forcing them to look at those dependencies and see if they can get the score improved. So there's a lot of good conversation that's happening, like, hey, so-and-so, can you enable, or do you have code review processes or something set up? I wrote a quick blog post on it, and I was trying to dig it up, but I can't find the link, but I'll paste it in the chat here. But I think one thing we did early in this working group too is just start talking through like different ways that we could help. Because like Chris was saying, it's not, thank you. Chris was saying, not just throwing money at a project is not exactly going to solve the problem. So we brainstormed like a bunch of ideas for how we could actually help, what projects actually need. So I think it'd be interesting if you were able to write up like a quick summary of like how, you think this group could help the Wecken, is that how you pronounce it? Wecken project could be super interesting. And then we could all sort of look at that and come up with ideas and brainstorm, and it would be a good use case for us in general if you're willing to do that, and we could go from there.
Yes, currently also it could be improved that Vegan does not have any or any tests, or it could have more tests, because most of those tests are automatically run what GitHub platform provides, and there could be more tests. Yeah,
I never heard of anything having too many tests, but yeah. I mean, it would be awesome if you could take the time, and then we could collectively kind of just use that as a use case to see how we might be able to help. So.
Yeah. Yes. I think.
I like the use case idea.
And I also thinking about what kind of funding can this project provide.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. Okay, was that all the questions? I think so. And then oh, sorry, Jenny, were you gonna ask? You're muted. No, you're not muted, but we can't hear you. Maybe drop and try coming back. Dan's been going on a dependency hunt, which has been pretty entertaining to read as well, trying to track back everything that happens when you do a Helm chart install for a repo. He's got a blog post that you need a cup of coffee and maybe a snack to get all the way through it, but it's a good read. I don't know if Dan wants to plug his own blog post in the chat, but if anyone's interested, you should check that one out. It's
Drop in some links.
While we're waiting, also Nuthan just joined, so he was one of the authors on that GitHub screening curation task. So Abhishek, he's in my top right. You can't point to anybody online.
He's like a highlighting feature. Cool.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I need to introduce the two of you guys.
Yeah, Chris linked the work that you're doing. I haven't looked at it yet, but it looks like there might be some interesting things that we can collaborate on as we talk about criticality of open source projects. So maybe we can follow up in another meeting or take a look and see what we can do together. Be cool.
Absolutely.
Jenny, any luck? No.
You're muted.
But now you're actually muted.
Oh, yeah. Is there anything else on the agenda? No. All right. Good for another minute or two.
Yeah, I guess while we wait, I was going to give a really quick update on the first phase of OSTIF's work with reviewing the Linux kernel. So I mentioned that in the presentation that I did to the group back in, I believe it was November or October, maybe even now. But yeah, so that is just about wrapped up, and we're going to be making a announcement and publishing the actual report. So and that's going to be very soon. So as soon as that's ready, I think I'll send it out to our work group email, just so everyone can get that directly. And if any questions come up, we're anticipating it to generate a lot of discussion. So if any questions come up or thoughts, please feel free to contact myself or Derek directly. But yeah, we're really excited about releasing those results with y'all and kind of show some of the work we've been doing to secure something critical like the Linux kernel. So hopefully more on that really soon.
Cool. Yeah, it'd be awesome if you wanted to give a little deep dive on that one of these meetings too. It'd be another.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd be happy to.
All right. I don't know. Oh, we're back. She's back.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, huzzah. Thank you guys for your patience. For whatever reason, bouncing between Zoom and Google Meet has just proven beyond my capabilities these days. Anyway, I apologize if one of the things I wanted to say, and I'm not sure if it was said while I was trying to, fix the situation, was at least for the weekend project, there's the chaos metrics is a source where people can kind of do a quick, check of the health of their own project, and making sure that on several different metrics. And I'm going to go into this in a little bit, but that was just something I wanted to promote. It's something that has come I've learned about through my work with the Linux Foundation. Has helped us when looking into some of the health metrics of different projects, and it can also be a good way to kind of have a starting point for a self-assessment of a project when we're creating that use case to see, okay, here's where we are in different metrics. It looks into the elephant factor or the truck factor, I guess, and getting a better sense of where help might be best targeted. I wanted to thank Abhishek for really getting the conversation started on something that we wanted to bring together. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing a document. Unfortunately, it's not as interesting as the slides, but it was kind of the best way that I could bring together a lot of the ideas that the Linux Foundation, Kim and Dan, and then us here at the Laboratory for Innovation Science at Harvard, that we've come together to try to kind of circle strafe, for those who don't mind the military imagery, circle strafe this problem of criticality and figuring out how best to target our efforts. So let me go ahead and present now. Hopefully I won't break the internet again. And window screen. You know what? I'm just going to go whole screen because that seems all right. Does anybody know how I can grant access to or permissions to share my screen? I'm trying to do that, but for whatever reason, I'm having difficulty.
Is it a browser thing?
Might be a browser thing.
Are you going to present the doc, Jenny, or was something?
Yeah, would you be so kind as just to pull up the doc? Thank you so much.
If you're on a Mac,
this has been, no, I'm on Windows, and for whatever reason, it's And today is just not my technological day. All right, so this was the link that was shared in the agenda for everybody for today's meeting, and it's taking a look at, and Kim's going to be so kind as to open this up for me, taking a look at how we are going to expand the efforts that Linux Foundation and the Laboratory for Innovation Science at Harvard that we've been working on over the past couple of years, and are now shifting over into the OpenSSF, which brought us to you guys. And it's looking at how we can answer some of the questions that Abhishek brought up, which is there are, hundreds of thousands of different projects. How do we even start looking at who might be the most important or critical? We can't use stars. It's hard to really see from downloads because you might download it but not use it. And so our first effort had been really going through and analyzing source code analysis or software composition analysis data that looked at language level libraries and which ones were the most commonly found, either as either directly found or as a dependency. And so that's good, but that really only gives us one segment of the whole picture, right? And another piece that we wanted to look at, if you can see the a little bit of a diagram below. So right now we're only looking at libraries, but downstream of that you have applications. Upstream of that you have to look at the firmware and the operating systems, and even before any of that, looking at the build tools and the compilers that are used, and really seeing which of any of these 5 segments are really going to be what we should target. Well, at the very least, we need to know more about what's being used in these kind of segments of the ecosystem. So right now, as far as the library or component level, we're using the SCA data, and we are doing another iteration of that early this year. We'll be looking at that private data, aggregating it, and getting a better sense of what is most commonly found out there within the private sector. So there's some of the data that we're not always able to see. Beyond that, in order to be able to see some of the more foundational segments of the ecosystem, like the compilers and the development tools, as well as the kind of the higher layer of which end user applications are most heavily used, we are proposing that we survey various organizations, whether it's companies or nonprofit organizations. We want to get a better sense of what people are using. And that's not something you can always get immediately out of automated data. There was, one suggestion had been for willing companies to offer up code that can do a scan of their networks and their environments to see what's being used. But as I'm sure anybody that's currently in a private company or has worked with private companies, not always something they're excited or willing to do, introducing outside code that supposedly is supposed to do one thing. Again, that's something that I think people are going to be a little more reticent to do. So the best way we've found to try to get more information about what is at least the most prevalent software that's out there is to do this via self-reporting survey from different organizations. So in our objectives, we're trying to also figure out this criticality factor. And so for us, a lot of it can come down to one of 3 types of criticality, right? There's the function of the software. If this is software that helps run a nuclear power plant or another part of critical infrastructure, the function of that particular project is going to be what makes it critical. Another way it can be thought of is just having a critical mass of the software. Is this something that's so ubiquitous that should something happen to it, should it suddenly disappear, what is that? What impact is that going to have? And sometimes it's not necessarily this. I think this criticality is more a criticality of avoiding inconvenience. I know that it sounds a little flippant. I don't mean it that way, but in the sense that, it might not have dire consequences, but at the same time, the disentanglement or exit costs of if this project were to disappear are quite high. And then the third way we've thought about it is really looking at a critical reliance upon the software. So, how many other pieces of software call upon this component or this application, or how is it interconnected with the rest of the ecosystem? And so, looking from the critical reliance of the software, kind of more at the high level, we're seeing, if there's what are the severity of consequences if it's exploited? What are the severity of consequences if there's malicious code inserted? And then what are the severity of consequences if for whatever reason, it were to, it's not able to sustain itself either. So there were a couple of instances, I think it was Node.js, forgive me if I'm wrong on that one, but one where the primary maintainer was facing possible jail time. And as a result, there was a bit of a crisis of succession and people not really sure about how the governance would continue. There's things like that. There's issues where projects have been abandoned, but they're still relied upon in these dependency networks. And so those are kind of the three main buckets of how we're looking at criticality, and how we're trying to figure out, okay, how does the usage of each of these, projects, how do they kind of, which of the buckets of criticality do they fit into? And then once we figure out how to identify and then weigh and then better understand how critical each of these projects that we're seeing appear in usage data. Once we figure that out, we need to figure out how to weigh that across others. So if it's something if it's a project that's heavily used in one sector, then that could be maybe about this level of criticality. But if we're looking at that same a different project and it's used across 3 or 4 different sectors of the economy, that's something that we would maybe want to end up weighing more heavily. And again, these are not. I appreciate that Abhishek was able to try to quantify some of these very difficult weights within his algorithm. But this is from our perspective, this is kind of our high-level view, 10,000-foot view that we want to bring to you guys and see if there are either existing tools or ways that we together can take into account these different aspects of criticality and weighting criticality and better understand it. As I had mentioned before, if you were looking under the reliance criticality, there's the chaos metrics, and I linked to some of them. And they look at least a few ways to assess business risk or the quality of code or different security issues that might come up. And so that's one tool that's kind of already in our tool belt that we're hoping to build off of. So how are we hoping to conduct this survey? One of the things that we thought might be the best way is to start with a survey of public and private organizations within the critical, what has been identified as the critical infrastructure sectors by the U.S. government. And so within that, we would.
Do you mean DHS?
Yes, sorry.
Did you specifically mean? Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Yes. So so we identified the 16 critical sectors from DHS, and we're trying to match that with other pools of contacts that we might be able to kind of make overlap. But I'll get into that a little bit down the road. The survey that we want to the information that we're trying to get at within the survey is really circles around these principal questions. And it's, do you allow open source applications to be used in your environment? What are the most widely used open source applications in your environment? What open software is on your company's allow list or deny list, to give us a better sense of what people are, at least in theory, hoping to, what they're trusting or depending upon more, or what their go-tos are, as well as what they've already kind of shunned aside or said, we're not going to be using that. But beyond that, we also want to know what does the reality on the ground actually look like? So how does your policy, we want to see how that policy is actually lining up with what is actually, what is actually happening on the ground. So just because, something is on the allow list doesn't mean that it's necessarily the first go-to for most people, or just because it's on the deny list, there's possibilities that it could be still sneaking in. Understanding what each organization's most important products and what is contained within those products, I think, is another way that will help people to kind of dig a little deeper into what open source they are actually using, even if it's not something that would come to mind immediately. We want to, these principal questions is really trying to get the context within each of these organizations thinking about what open source they're using in a lot of different ways and from a lot of different angles. Instead of just saying, hey, what open source do you use? Because as I'm sure we all know, it's not always going to immediately come to mind. You got to kind of take it back layer by layer. Another piece that we wanted to look at, but we thought wouldn't necessarily be as important to really go into as much detail, was compilers. We expect that most of them will be using GCC or LLVM. But we still want to get a better sense of what they're currently using and what they plan to use in the next few years. The reason we're not as worried about this is just it's a smaller pool of what's out there, and we kind of already know some of the big actors in this particular segment of the ecosystem. And then also looking at the build development tools and what they're planning to use in the future. And most of these principal questions would be directed towards an organization's either CTO or PCERT team. But additionally, we thought there could be other data requests that different key respondent groups could provide a little more information about. And so we would look into asking development teams to get a better sense of the package manager, slice of the pie. Looking into distros and distro release managers, asking them more specifically about that level as well. And then also looking specifically and asking more targeted questions of cloud service providers or container creators. And then obviously this is, to survey private organizations and even public ones as well. We kind of have the same issue that Abhishek had, which is there's so many, where do you even begin? And so this is where we thought what we could do was using the CISA's definition of which were the critical infrastructures. We kind of marry those up with some of the Linux Foundation's initiatives. So they have a lot of industry-specific initiatives that we can pull from and kind of use that as a starting point within each of these very critical sectors. I haven't gotten through and married up each of these 16 major sectors with an LF initiative, but there are quite a few out there, and I'm going to go ahead and link those as I can. Sorry, so Kim, this is down on the third page. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. And thank you again for driving. I appreciate it. And then, and also, if anyone within this group knows, oh, okay, well, my group is already currently working with, I don't know if anybody's, really big in the dams sector. That's one that I think we're going to end up having, holes in, or even if there are other kind of working groups that are already out there that are combining industry as well as people kind of on the research side in any of these particular sectors, I welcome people to add it in and link it. So it'll be a great place to kind of have a starting point to start looking at some of the leaders in each of these sectors, and then hopefully from there, we'd be able to create a good distribution list to at least get kind of the heavy hitters in each of these sectors, and that's going to be a good jumping off point. Please.
What about going through the ISACs? You know that?
I do not. Forgive me. I'm a bit more of a generalist, so I am happy to be schooled on any and all acronyms and resources.
Okay, I just put a link. I put a link. They're organized groups. They predominantly do threat sharing, but they're organized by sector. So you have, the big ones are finance, defense, and I think energy is pretty big. But there's a list there, and those have member organizations, and what they have is the distribution lists that you need.
Great. Thank you very much. Yes, I will include that as well. And yes, as I see, someone named Anonymous Bat is going in and adding additional pieces in our energy sector. Thank you, Anonymous Bat, in my Google Doc. Then the next piece that we want to look at is, this is obviously going to be a big undertaking, and it's something that we wanted to, draw upon the broad network of contacts that OpenSSF has. Obviously, we have a lot of great, a lot of deep knowledge here within this working group, and so we wanted to see, as we pull this together, I wanted to kind of just lay out what I thought the tasks would be for creating this, and then see what would make the most sense if there are people who are already, who already have an in with particular sectors or companies. That's going to be great. Getting people's feedback on getting people's feedback on the design and creation of the survey prior to it going out, making sure we're asking the right questions, and really trying to cover all our bases. But beyond that as well, there was a thought that there could be an option to, as companies respond, to add in what they've already listed as options for people to select within a, as they're answering the survey. So if I came in and I said I'm using project A, B, and C, and then Amir comes in and he says I'm using projects A, B, and D, and then Kim comes in and says, oh, I'm using J, A, and C. That the fourth person that would come in would be able to see all of the different options that have been added, and then also add their own, so that there's kind of a real-time updating of potential options, which can help trigger people. Oh yeah, that is something that we're using. Oh, that is something that we have been adding in into our environment. So just kind of, this was a very, very cursory kind of introduction to what we're hoping to do and how we're hoping to take our current census project, which right now is only looking at SCA data. We want to continue to do that, but then we want to use this survey as a complementary project that would better inform, like I said, all of the different segments of the ecosystem, and get better usage on what's being used in open source across these different segments, from compiler to end user application. Well, I hope that, I know that is the 10,000 foot view. I hope that's not too dizzying for people here. I know I've tried to cover a lot of ground fairly quickly, but this is something that we're hoping to delve into more in the coming weeks, and are definitely open to anyone reaching out. Let me go ahead and put my email directly in the chat, and that way, if anybody has any questions, also I want to double check. All right, so we do have the info. And thank you again for, directing me to the ISAC, sorry. All right, so Jay Hoffman.
This is awesome, Jenny. We only have a couple minutes left. Is there anything immediately like that you would want this group to do? Just review this doc, maybe share it, or
My request number one would be to review this doc. Does it pass the smell test for you? Are we missing anything specific? Do you think there are tools out there that could that already exist that might answer some of the outstanding questions we still have? So really just take a look through this doc, add to it any good resources that you can see. If there are particular tasks within the division of labor section that you think, oh, I would be really stoked about trying to figure out how to target the distribution of this survey, or I know ways to design a survey where it's really helpful to, where it already knows how to incorporate some of the answers other respondents have given, making it easier for people to just start like dragging and dropping what they're using if it's already been given as an answer by someone else. But yeah, those are the two big asks: is help us make sure that we're catching what we need to, and we're really understanding the problem correctly, offering up any ways to identify the big players in each of these 16 sectors, and then if there are any parts of this project that you or your company or other people that you know, either in academia or elsewhere, would be really excited about or could provide a little bit more insight into, that would be great. That's my big three. I think it's still a lot to ask, so I won't ask for more.
Yeah, how widely do you want this circulated? Like keep it within the working group? I wonder if we could share it with the TAC of the foundation, or if you have.
I would say,
you can get back to me or whatever.
Let me get back to you on that. I definitely within this working group, go nuts. I would say if it's shared with others, that it's known that this is still very much a rough draft and not anything that's to be published publicly,
Right.
That would be fine.
Okay. Yeah, we can think about that. Just wondering to make sure you get, a well-rounded breadth of feedback.
For sure. And honestly, if you're not sure, go shoot me an email and we'll make a decision together. Sound good?
Awesome. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you everybody so much. I really appreciate it. And forgive me, I do have to drop a little early. I've got to get prepped and hopefully avoid all of the technical difficulties I had here for my next call. But thank you again for your time and your help.
Yeah, thank you.
And looking forward to this. Thanks, everybody. Much appreciated.
Cool. And thank you, Abhishek, for presenting. We're about out of time, so we don't have anything on the agenda for next time. If there are topics you want to discuss, or if we want to dive into some of that the other research that Microsoft has done, that would be awesome. But feel free to add it to the agenda. And have a great day, everybody. Good seeing you all.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, everyone.